The flashbulb felt like a physical slap. Rowan Vale stood frozen, her champagne flute trembling as a sea of whispers erupted around her. The man she married, Damian Vale, the supposed billionaire king of the city, had just walked onto the red carpet of the Oracle Gala. And on his arm wasn't his wife. It was Chloe Jensen, a 22-year-old influencer, dripping in diamonds that Rowan knew her husband had paid for. Damian smirked, a cruel, triumphant look aimed right at her. He thought he was winning. He thought he was humiliating her. He had no idea he'd just ended his own life. The silence in the penthouse on 72nd Street wasn't peaceful. It was a vacuum, heavy and suffocating. For the past 6 months, this was the sound of Rowan's marriage. Rowan Kendall, Vale as she was known to the world, traced the rim of her coffee cup, her eyes fixed on the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of Central Park, so beautiful in the spring, was a grey, watery smear. It matched her life. She had met Damian Vale 7 years ago. She'd been working, incognito, in the junior acquisitions department of a real estate fund called Vanguard. She was Rowan Kendall, the quiet, whip-smart analyst with a degree from Brown and a background she described as academic. Her father, she'd told him, was a literature professor in Vermont. This was a carefully constructed truth. Her uncle, Arthur Kendall, was a literature professor in Vermont. But her father, Julian Blackwood, was something else, entirely. He was the invisible hand, the reclusive founder of Blackwood Capital, the multi-trillion-dollar private equity Goliath that was the majority shareholder of nearly everything, including the Vanguard Fund. Go live a real life, Ellie Bean, Julian had told her on her 25th birthday, in his library that smelled of old leather and power. See what the world is like without the Blackwood name opening every door. See who people really are. And she had. She had met Damian. He was a vice president then, a meteor of ambition, charisma, and ruthless energy. He was brilliant, funny, and he seemed for a time to genuinely see her. He'd loved her intelligence, her quiet confidence. He hadn't needed her to be anything other than Rowan Kendall. They married a year later, with her father's quiet blessing and a prenuptial agreement drafted by Julian's most terrifying lawyers. Then, 5 years ago, the Vanguard CEO had retired. Julian, from the shadows, had suggested Damian for the role. "Let's see what he's made of," he'd said. The power had been a poison. The man Rowan had married vanished, replaced by a strutting, arrogant creature who referred to himself in the third person. Damian Vale closes deals. Damian Vale is the new king of New York. He'd been featured on the cover of Forbes 6 months ago, lauded as the billionaire builder. He'd forgotten, it seemed, that he was a steward, not a king. He'd forgotten he was given the keys. He'd started to believe he'd built the castle himself. And with that arrogance came the carelessness. Her name was Chloe Jensen. Rowan had first seen her in the Post. Rowan had been at a cafe, and the headline on the front page screamed, "Vale's new Vanguard?" The photo was of Damian on a yacht in Miami, a yacht owned by Rowan's family trust, with his arm around a skeletal blonde. Chloe was wearing a bikini that seemed to be made of dental floss and a 15-carat diamond necklace Rowan recognized. It was the one Damian had given Rowan for their 3rd anniversary. The humiliation had been a physical, burning sickness. Now tonight was the Oracle Gala, the single most important social and financial event of the year. Damian, obsessed with his newfound celebrity, had been planning his triumphant arrival for weeks. He had left 3 hours ago, claiming a pre-gala strategy meeting. His last words to her, barked as he adjusted his Tom Ford cufflinks, were, Rowan, the Oracle Gala is on Friday. Try to look presentable. Wear the blue dress. The blue dress. The one he'd bought her after closing the landmark Titan Tower deal, the deal that had supposedly cemented his billionaire status. This, he'd said, gesturing to their sterile, white-on-white living room, is the life I built. Don't you ever forget how lucky you are. Rowan now stood before the full-length mirror in their cavernous dressing room. She was not wearing the blue dress. She wore a custom gown of deep emerald velvet, a colour that brought out the fire in her otherwise cool, grey eyes. It was classic, severe, and devastatingly elegant. Her blonde hair was swept back in a chignon that exposed the clean line of her jaw. She wore a single piece of jewellery, a modest 3-strand pearl necklace. It had been her mother's. Her phone, a simple, untrackable burner she used only for one number, rang. "It's done," she said, answering. "Are you absolutely certain, Ellie?" Her father's voice, deep and calm, came through the line. "I can crush him from my desk. I can have him in federal prison by Monday for what he's done with the Titan leverage. You don't have to go through with this." Rowan closed her eyes, gathering her strength. "No, Father. I have to. He needs to do it to himself. Publicly. I need to see him choose." A heavy sigh. "As you wish. David and I have landed at Titterboro. We'll be there by 10. "Thank you, Daddy." She hung up. Her driver, a man named Thomas, who had been with her family for 20 years and had served as her uncle's driver in Vermont on weekends, was waiting by the private elevator. "You look exactly like your mother tonight, Miss Rowan," he said softly. "Are you ready?" "I am, Thomas," Rowan replied, her voice perfectly steady. As she stepped into the sedan, alone, the cold night air felt sharp and clean. The humiliation was coming. She knew that. Damian had planned it. What Damian didn't know was that his plan and his entire paper-thin empire was about to burn to the ground. And Rowan wasn't the one holding the match. She was the one who had supplied the kerosene and built the pyre. The grand atrium of the Metropolis Museum was a cathedral of wealth. 3-story-high chandeliers glittered off a sea of diamonds, and the air hummed with the sound of 1,000 deals being brokered under the guise of philanthropy. Rowan arrived first, a deliberate move. She stepped out of the black sedan and onto the red carpet alone. The effect was immediate. The press, who had been expecting the Vales to arrive as a power couple, descended like sharks, a wall of flashing lights and shouted questions. "Rowan, where's Damian? Mrs. Vale, who are you wearing? Flying solo tonight, Rowan? Is the marriage in trouble, Rowan? Is it true about Chloe Jensen?" She smiled, a small, polite tilt of her lips. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest, but her voice was a smooth, practiced lie. "Damian had a last-minute meeting. You know how he is, always closing a deal. I'm sure he'll be here soon." She moved through the gauntlet with a poise that infuriated them, a ghost in emerald velvet. She refused to give them the blood they craved. She found her assigned table. Table 1, front and center, a testament to Damian's perceived power. It was already filling up. Michael Vance, a senior board member at Vanguard, and his wife, Clara, looked up as she approached. Michael, a man in his late 60s with a perpetually worried expression, nearly choked on his water. "Rowan," he stammered, rising. We were expecting. That is, Damian is running late," Rowan said smoothly, taking her seat. The other couples at the table, all VPs at Vanguard and their skeletal wives, exchanged nervous, guilty glances. They knew. Of course they knew. They'd been beneficiaries of Damian's new party lifestyle. "You look lovely, dear," Clara Vance offered, her voice tight with pity. "Thank you, Clara." Rowan accepted a glass of champagne from a waiter and took a delicate sip. And then she waited. She didn't have to wait long. A commotion at the entrance signaled his arrival. A fresh barrage of flashbulbs, brighter this time, a roar of noise, a murmur that grew into an audible gasp that rippled across the entire atrium. And there he was, Damian Vale, in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, his face flushed with triumph and champagne. And clinging to his arm, like a gaudy scarlet parasite, was Chloe Jensen. Chloe was a vulgar splash of red in a room of muted, expensive tones. Her dress was scarlet sequins, slit to the thigh, her chest aggressively displayed by structural tape. She looked less like a guest and more like an expensive party favor. She was preening, lapping up the attention, her eyes darting around to see who was watching her. This was the moment Rowan had dreaded, and the one she had prepared for. It was one thing to see photos in a tabloid. It was another to watch your husband parade his mistress in front of everyone you knew. The whispers were immediate and brutal. My God, is that her? He brought her here, to the Oracle? Where is Rowan? Oh, wait, she's right there, at the table. He's walking right past her. It was true. Damian, with Chloe on his arm, scanned the room. He saw table 1. He saw his executives, and he saw his wife. Their eyes met across the expanse of orchids and crystal. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look ashamed. He winked. It was a slow, deliberate, cruel gesture. Look at me. Look at what I can do. You are nothing. He then deliberately turned his back to Rowan's table and guided Chloe toward a different group, a gaggle of tech bros and reality TV stars who hooted and cheered his arrival. Rowan felt the blood drain from her face. The flashbulb that went off in that instant captured her perfectly. The wronged wife, pale and alone. That was the photo that would be on the cover of the Post tomorrow. A woman at the next table, Sarah Carrington, a socialite whose family had feuded with Rowan's mother's family for generations, glided over. "Rowan, darling," Sarah stage whispered, her voice dripping with venomous, false sympathy. "What a brave face you're putting on. You're a vision in that green. So brave to come alone when your husband is, well, closing a deal." She smirked, mimicking the tabloid headlines. Rowan turned her cool grey eyes on the woman. "Better to be alone by choice, Sarah, than to be an accessory no one chose at all. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm waiting for a guest." Sarah recoiled, her smile faltering, and slunk away. But the damage was done. The room was buzzing. Everyone was watching the triangle. Damian, laughing too loudly with his arm snaked around Chloe's surgically enhanced waist, Chloe, kissing him for the cameras, and Rowan, sitting alone at the CEO's table, a perfect statue of public humiliation. This, Rowan knew, was Damian's opening salvo. This was him trying to break her, to force her to run out in tears, to abdicate her position so Chloe could slide into it. Rowan took another delicate sip of her champagne. Her hand was perfectly steady. She would not run, she would not cry. She would simply wait, because the real guest of honor hadn't arrived yet. Damian Vale felt like a god. The air crackled around him. He'd done it. He'd finally ripped off the Band-Aid. His life for the past year had been a suffocating lie. Rowan, with her quiet judgments, her classic tastes, and her old money sensibilities. She was a ghost in his penthouse, a reminder of a life he'd been trying to transcend. She was boring. She was an anchor. Chloe, on the other hand, was life. She was raw, ambitious, and she adored him. She saw him for the king he was. She was a rocket. Walking in with Chloe on his arm was the single most liberating moment of his life. He saw the shock on the faces of the board members. He saw the envy in the eyes of the other men. And best of all, he saw the look on Rowan's face. That pale, frozen shock. It was perfect. He had finally broken her. "You've really done it, baby," Chloe whispered, her voice husky. She squeezed his arm, her long, red nails digging slightly into his jacket. "You're the most powerful man in this room. Everyone is terrified of you." "We're just getting started," Damian murmured back, kissing her temple. He spotted Michael Vance, lingering nervously by the raw bar, his face ashen. "Michael, get over here! Bring some of that caviar!" Damian boomed. Michael Vance shuffled over, his eyes flicking from Damian to Chloe, and then, guiltily, across the room to Rowan. "Damian," Michael said, his voice low and tight with panic. "What are you doing? This is a catastrophe. Rowan is sitting right over there. The investors, the representatives from Blackwood Capital, they're here tonight. This is a direct violation of the morality clause in your contract." Damian laughed, a short, barking sound. "The morality clause? Michael, are you kidding me? That's a fossil, a legal technicality. I am the contract. The Titan Tower deal, which I closed, just made our shareholders $1 billion. $1 billion, Michael. You think the ghosts at Blackwood give a damn about my date? They care about the bottom line. I am the bottom line. Damian, you don't understand," Michael pleaded. "This is reckless. It's suicide." "It's power, Michael," Damian hissed. "It's showing them I do what I want. Now, I want you to meet Chloe Jensen. She's the new face of our luxury properties division. She's going to be handling the new Miami developments." Michael looked at Chloe as if she were a viper. "A pleasure," he mumbled, refusing to take her offered hand. "He's cute," Chloe pouted as Michael scurried away, like a little, terrified garden gnome. "Don't worry about him, baby. Show me the real players." "He's irrelevant," Damian said, dismissing him. "They all are." His gaze drifted back to table 1. His table. She was still sitting there. Why wasn't she leaving? He'd expected tears, a scene, a dramatic exit, but she just sat there. It was unnerving. He decided to force the issue. This was his night, his room, his city. He would claim his throne. He strode over to table 1, dragging Chloe with him. The music seemed to quiet as he approached. The executives at the table froze, champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Rowan looked up at him, her expression as calm and unreadable as a frozen lake. "Rowan," he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I was wondering if you'd have the dignity to leave. This is deeply embarrassing for you." "Is it?" she replied, her voice perfectly level. "I'm not the one who's embarrassing myself, Damian." Damian laughed. "It's over, Rowan. This charade of a marriage. I'm done." He reached into his jacket pocket. "I was going to have these served to you tomorrow, but this is so much more efficient." He threw a small, folded packet of legal documents onto the table. "Those are divorce papers. I'll have the locks on the penthouse changed on Monday. My lawyers at K&L reviewed the prenup. It's ironclad. You get the little house in Vermont your professor father owns, and a lump sum of $2 million. A pathetic pittance. I keep everything. I keep the penthouse, the cars, the company. I keep my life. This is my night. This is my city." Rowan looked at the papers, then back at him. A tiny, curious smile played on her lips. "The penthouse?" she asked, her voice light. "Damian, you lease the penthouse." A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" The company pays for it." "Exactly," she said. "And the prenup. You mean the one my lawyers drafted?" "The one my lawyers reviewed," he snapped. "It's ironclad. You get nothing." "I get what's mine, Damian," she said softly. "And you get, well, You're about to find out exactly what you've built." "What does that mean?" he sneered. "Are you going to have your nobody father in Vermont write a strongly worded letter? Is Professor Arthur going to bore me with Shakespeare?" "No," Rowan said, her gaze lifting from him to the grand entrance of the atrium. "He isn't." "You're pathetic," Damian spat. "A dried-up, boring little—" He was cut off, not by Rowan, but by a sudden, profound hush that fell over the atrium. It was different from the previous murmurs. This was a sudden, heavy silence, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The string quartet, which had been playing Vivaldi, faltered and stopped, one cello holding a long, scraping, discordant note before falling silent. All heads, including Damian's, turned to the grand entrance. The gala organizers and the museum's board of directors, who had been clustered by the door, seemed to snap to attention, forming an impromptu, fawning honor guard. Two figures stood silhouetted in the doorway. The first man was in his late 30s, with a severe face, a military-straight posture, and an earpiece. He scanned the room with a cold, professional efficiency. Damian recognized him vaguely. He'd seen him in the background of photos with heads of state. This was David Barlev, the legendary head of security for someone mythical. The second man, he was the one everyone was watching. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of silver-white hair, impeccably cut. He wore a simple, custom-tailored black tuxedo. He wasn't tall or broad, but he moved with an aura of absolute, indisputable authority. He was the kind of man who didn't own rooms. He was the room. He walked, and the sea of New York's elite parted for him as if he were royalty. Damian squinted. The man looked vaguely familiar, like someone from a history book or a secret file. "Who the hell is that?" Chloe whispered, annoyed that the attention was no longer on her. Damian didn't know. But Michael Vance, who was still hovering nearby, had gone from pale to a ghastly, corpse-like grey. He literally collapsed into a vacant chair. It's... Michael whispered, his voice trembling. "Oh my God, it's him. It's Julian Blackwood." Damian's heart stopped. Julian Blackwood. The name was a myth, a ghost story Wall Street traders told their children. Julian Blackwood wasn't just old money. He was the source, the founder of Blackwood Capital, the Ghost Fund, the silent majority shareholder of Vanguard Holdings, and half of the S&P 500. A man who had not been seen at a public event in 15 years, the man he'd been sending quarterly reports to, addressed only to the chairman's office. Damian's mind scrambled. He'd never met him. He'd assumed it was a faceless board, a managed trust. He'd never made the connection. A surge of adrenaline, not fear, hit Damian. This was an opportunity. The real boss was here. This was his chance to cut out the middlemen like Vance, to introduce himself, to solidify his power. Julian Blackwood was walking. He ignored the gasping socialites. He walked past the mayor, offering only a curt nod. He walked past a senator who looked like he was about to genuflect. He was walking directly to table 1. Damian straightened his tie, shoving the divorce papers back in his pocket, and plastered a sycophantic, brilliant smile on his face. He stepped forward, pushing Michael's chair out of the way and dragging Chloe with him. "Mr. Blackwood, sir," Damian boomed, extending his hand. "What an honor, a true honor. I'm Damian Vale, CEO of Vanguard Holdings. I've been wanting to meet you for years. I'm the man behind the Titan Tower deal. We're making you a lot of money, sir." Julian Blackwood stopped. He was now standing in the small space between Damian's group and Rowan's table. He looked at Damian's outstretched hand. He looked at Damian's face. He looked at Chloe, who was plastered to Damian's side. His eyes, a piercing, icy blue, held Damian's gaze. He said nothing. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. It was the loudest, most humiliating silence of Damian's life. Then Julian Blackwood turned his head. His gaze fell on Rowan, who had risen from her chair. The ice in his eyes melted instantly. A warmth and fondness that was shocking in its suddenness flooded his expression. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Rowan, my dear," Julian Blackwood said, his voice deep and warm, resonating through the silent room. "You look magnificent, exactly like your mother. That velvet is perfect." He glided past Damian as if he were a piece of furniture, as if he hadn't spoken, as if he didn't exist. He walked directly to Rowan. He took both of her hands in his and kissed her on both cheeks. "I'm sorry I'm late, Ellie Bean," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire atrium to hear. The traffic from Teterboro was hell. Rowan smiled, a real, warm smile that Damian hadn't seen in years. "You're right on time, Father." The sound of 1,000 indrawn breaths, the sound of Sarah Carrington's champagne flute shattering on the floor. Father. Damian Vale's world, which had been so solid and triumphant 5 seconds ago, cracked, splintered, and then vaporized. "Father!" he choked out, the word sounding alien and wrong. He laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical, breaking sound. "What? That's a good one, Rowan. That's hilarious. Your father he's Arthur Kendall, a literature professor. A nobody." Rowan turned, her face a mask of cool composure, and faced her husband. "My father," she said, her voice ringing with clarity, "is Julian Blackwood. Arthur is my uncle. I am Rowan Blackwood. I took my mother's maiden name, Kendall, because my father and I wanted to see who you really were, Damian. We wanted to see if you loved me, or if you would one day love the power you thought was yours." She gestured to the stunned, silent room. "And tonight, in front of God and everyone, you finally gave us our answer." Damian Vale's brain simply ceased to function. He was drowning, pulling at his collar, his eyes darting between Julian, the god king of capital, and Rowan, the woman he'd just publicly and fatally scorned. Chloe, finally understanding that she had backed the wrong, catastrophically outmatched horse, was the first to react. She was a cornered animal. She ripped her arm from Damian's, her eyes wide with panic. I didn't know," she shrieked, looking at Julian. He told me. He told me she was a nobody. He told me he was the boss. He said she was poor, from Vermont. I'm a victim here, Mr. Blackwood, sir. He forced me to come. He's a monster." She even slapped Damian across the face, a desperate act of dissociation. "You idiot! You loser! You lied to me!" Julian Blackwood didn't even look at her. He simply raised an eyebrow in the direction of his security chief, David. "David," Julian said, his voice bored. "This creature is not on the guest list, and I believe she is wearing a 15-carat necklace belonging to my daughter. Please have her, and her cubic zirconia, escorted from the premises. Have her itemized and returned to the company vault by morning." "Cubic zirconia!" Chloe shrieked, her hand flying to the other necklace Damian had bought her. "These are—" "Ma'am," David said, his voice like granite. He and another security guard, who had materialized from the crowd, grabbed her arms. "You can't!" Chloe screamed as they dragged her, in her scarlet dress, across the marble floor. "Damian, do something! You promised me! You promised me Miami!" Damian was frozen, a statue of his own ruined ambition. Chloe was hauled, kicking and sobbing, out of the atrium. The sound of her fading screeches echoed over the marble. Now, Julian Blackwood's full, undivided and frigid attention was on Damian. "So," Julian said, "you are the man who has been running one of my smaller companies, the man who has been sleeping in my daughter's home, the man who has been spending my money on that." "Mr. Blackwood." "Sir." "Julian," Damian stammered, holding his hands up. "This is a misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Rowan and we were having problems, yes, but this is just a what, Mr. Vale?" Julian pressed. "A mistake? You are 44 years old. You are the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. We do not tolerate mistakes. We only tolerate results." "The results?" Damian latched onto the word, his last lifeline. "The results? Look at the Titan Tower deal. I closed it. I made this company a fortune. I built that. I made you $1 billion. "You," Julian said, taking one step closer as Damian instinctively took one step back. "Built nothing." Julian's voice snapped like a whip. "You were a steward, a glorified groundskeeper. You were given a company with zero debt, AAA-rated bonds, and the best assets in the world. And what did you do?" He looked around at Michael Vance, who was now weeping quietly into a napkin. "I'll tell you what he did. He took my stable assets and gambled them. The Titan Tower deal isn't a triumph, Mr. Vale. It's a bomb, a time bomb. You leveraged 3 of my most stable properties against derivative junk bonds to get a flashy headline in Forbes. You exposed Blackwood Capital to a $4 billion risk for your ego." The board approved," Damian whispered, his world dissolving. "The board you stacked with your sycophants?" Julian scoffed. "Damian, did you really think I wouldn't have my own man on the inside?" He nodded at Michael Vance. "Michael, stand up." Michael, trembling, stood. "Michael," Julian said, "has been reporting your every idiotic, egotistical, and borderline criminal move to me, weekly for the past 2 years. We were just waiting for you to violate the morality clause so we could fire you for cause and without a golden parachute, and Damian, you just handed it to us on a silver platter in front of the entire New York press." Damian looked at Michael, his eyes screaming betrayal. Michael just shook his head. "I tried to warn you, Damian. Tonight. I begged you. And the prenup," Rowan's voice cut in, clear and cold. He mentioned it." "Ah, yes. The prenup." A thin, cruel smile played on Julian's lips. He looked at Damian. "You seemed very confident in that document. The one you thought protected your assets from her." "It's ironclad," Damian croaked, his last thread of hope. "My lawyers said so. She gets the pittance her family had." "You truly are an idiot," Julian said, with genuine disappointment. "You didn't read the addendum, did you? Addendum 4B, the Blackwood Trust Clause. It states that all properties, assets, and liquid capital gifted or managed by you, including your salary, your bonuses, and your stock options, are all held in a trust that I control, a trust that, per Clause 12B, which cites—" "What was the wording, Rowan?" Rowan stepped forward, her face calm. "I believe it was a public act of profound moral turpitude. Like, say, flaunting a mistress at a charity gala to humiliate your wife." "Exactly," Julian said. "You don't get the penthouse, Damian. You don't get the stock options. You don't even get the car. You get a taxi. You walk out of here with the watch on your wrist. Oh, wait, that was a birthday gift from Rowan, so that's mine too. You walk out of here with the clothes on your back. And you are, as of this second, terminated for cause." Damian Vale's entire existence had been vaporized in under 3 minutes. He was no longer a CEO. He was no longer a billionaire. He was no longer a husband. He was, as Julian had so precisely put it, nothing. His knees literally buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself, his breath coming in ragged, ugly gasps. He looked at Rowan. His face was a mask of desperate, pleading confusion. He was looking for the woman he had dismissed, the quiet, mousy wife he'd controlled. He was looking for mercy. "Rowan," he whispered, the name a broken plea. "Ellie, please, don't. It was a mistake. I was stressed. The pressure of the deal. I love you. I've always loved you. She meant nothing. She was just fun. You're my wife." This was the moment. The entire room was watching her. Would she fold? Would she show the weakness he'd always accused her of? Rowan stepped forward, her emerald dress rustling. She stood directly in front of Damian, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead and the terror in his eyes. Her own grey eyes were not filled with hate or even anger. They were filled with a profound, cold pity. "You're right, Damian," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I am your wife, and I'm the woman who sat in that penthouse for a year, watching you become this caricature from a Forbes magazine. I'm the woman who read the credit card bills for Chloe's business trips to St. Bart's." She continued, her voice rising slightly, but never losing its steely control. "I'm the woman who knew you were leveraging our future for your ego. I didn't love a man. I loved a projection, and the projection is over. You didn't just cheat on me, Damian. You cheated yourself. You had everything. You had the love of a woman who knew you were just a man, and you had the keys to an empire, and you threw it all away for this." She gestured to the scene of his humiliation. You bitch!" he finally roared, his terror replaced by a sudden, violent rage. "You set me up! This was all a trap!" He lunged, not at Julian, but at Rowan. It was a pathetic, last-ditch attempt to grab her, to use her as a shield, to wipe that calm, pitying look off her face. He never made it. David, Rowan's head of security, who had returned from his task, moved with a speed that was almost invisible. He didn't punch Damian. He didn't tackle him. He simply stepped in, grabbed Damian's lunging arm, and executed a perfect, brutal joint lock. A sickening snap echoed through the atrium, followed by Damian's high-pitched, unearthly scream of agony. He collapsed to the marble floor, cradling his now dislocated shoulder, sobbing, a broken, pathetic heap in a $10,000 tuxedo. "Get him out of my sight," Julian said with a sigh of disgust. David and the other guard picked Damian up by his good arm and his belt, his expensive shoes dragging pathetically on the floor, and hauled him away through a door marked "Staff." The media, cameras flashing, surged forward, capturing the billionaire's final, humiliating exit. The room was in stunned silence. The main event was over. Julian Blackwood turned to the horrified, fascinated crowd. He clapped his hands together once. "My apologies for the aggressive restructuring," he said, his good humor seemingly restored. "A small infestation that needed clearing out. Please, continue enjoying your evening." He then walked to the small stage at the front of the room, taking the microphone from the shocked MC. "Good evening," he said, his voice booming over the speakers. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julian Blackwood. I am the owner." Laughter, nervous and relieved, rippled through the room. "I am generally a silent partner," he continued. "I believe in letting good people do good work, but it has become clear that Vanguard Holdings has been suffering from a profound lack of leadership. A moral and financial rot that ends tonight. The Vanguard board, all of Mr. Vale's appointments, is hereby dissolved." He let that sink in. "But," he said, A new era requires new leadership. Someone with integrity. Someone with vision. Someone who understands that true power isn't about headlines. It's about stability. It's about building things that last. He smiled and held out his hand. It is my profound honor to announce the new head of the Blackwood Capital North American Real Estate Division. My daughter, Rowan Blackwood. Another gasp. This was the real twist. She wasn't just the heiress. She was the successor. Rowan, poised and calm, walked to the stage. She took the microphone from her father, her hand not trembling in the slightest. She looked out at the sea of faces, the people who, 30 minutes ago, had pitied her. "Thank you, Father," she said. Her voice was strong. "Vanguard Holdings will be reabsorbed into the Central Blackwood Fund. My first act will be a full, transparent audit. We will find every dollar Mr. Vale and his associates misplaced, and we will be clawing back every bonus from the last 2 years associated with the Titan deal." She looked directly into the main camera of the press pool. "To our investors, I say this. The era of reckless gambling is over. The era of integrity has begun. We are back to building." The room exploded in applause. Not just polite applause, but a genuine, thunderous roar of approval. They hadn't just witnessed a takedown. They had witnessed a coronation. 1 year later, the corner office on the 80th floor of the Blackwood building, the real center of power, was unrecognizable. Damian's regime had been one of dark, heavy mahogany, of leather-bound books he'd never read, of ominous, heavy drapes kept partially drawn as if to suggest perpetual, shadowy conspiracy. It had been a tomb, a stage set for a man playing a role. Rowan's office was the antithesis. It was a place of light. The walls were a clean, warm white, accented with modern art by living female artists she admired. The furniture was sleek, minimalist, and functional, and the entire west-facing wall, which Damian had kept covered, was now an uninterrupted sheet of glass that overlooked the city, the Hudson River, and the distant promise of the ocean. Rowan Blackwood, her hair now cut in a sharp, practical bob that framed her face, stood before it, sipping her morning coffee. She no longer used the Vale name. It had been scrubbed from her life, just as Damian had been. On a sleek television mounted to the wall, a financial news anchor was speaking. And Rowan Blackwood, in her first year, has done the impossible. She's not only stabilized the fund after the disastrous Titan leverage scheme of her predecessor, but she has posted record-breaking 20% growth by divesting from high-risk commercial properties and pivoting to sustainable residential development. A true masterstroke from the woman they're now calling the Velvet Hammer. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Blackwood," her assistant Ben said, "Sarah is here for your 9 a.m. Send her in, Ben, and please hold all calls for the next 30 minutes, unless it's my father." The door opened, and Sarah Jenkins walked in, holding a tablet. Sarah, the brilliant young analyst who had been Michael Vance's assistant, was now Rowan's chief operating officer. She was sharp, loyal, and utterly allergic to nonsense, which was why Rowan had promoted her to COO within 3 months. "Morning, Rowan," Sarah said, forgoing the ma'am for the professional intimacy they shared. "The Q3 numbers are finalized. We're not just up 20%. We're up 22.5%. The Shanghai-based investors are ecstatic. We've more than recouped all the Titan losses and restored the bond rating to 8AA. "Good," Rowan said, taking the tablet and scanning the figures. "That's a solid foundation. What's the exposure on the London properties post-restructure?" "Minimal. You were right to sell off the Vanguard building. It was a prestige asset, but a financial black hole. Damian only bought it because it had his name on it. A monument to ego," Rowan murmured. "And we sold it to our biggest competitor for a 10% premium. Let them deal with the upkeep." She handed the tablet back. "Excellent work, Sarah. You and your team have been phenomenal." "We just follow your lead," Sarah said. She gestured to the muted television. "Though I have to say, the Velvet Hammer is a bit much, don't you think?" Rowan sighed, a rare glimpse of weariness. "The press needs a narrative, Sarah. They're men. They're baffled by a woman who is both polite and profitable. They'd prefer I was a dragon. Let them have their nickname, as long as they spell the company name right." "Fair enough. One last thing. David is outside. He said you asked for the final report." Rowan's posture stiffened, just slightly. "I did. Send him in on your way out. And Sarah, schedule the press conference for the Kendall project for next Friday." "I think it's time." Sarah's eyes lit up. "It's a go. The permits are all signed." "They will be by noon," Rowan said. "It's time." Sarah left, a visible spring in her step, and a moment later David Barlev entered. Her head of security, the man who had been at her father's side, was now permanently assigned to her. He was in his usual severe black suit, and he carried a single, slim manila folder. He placed it on her desk. "Ms. Blackwood, the final update on threat assessment Vale Jensen, as requested." Rowan sat down, her chair sighing softly. She looked at the file, the name Vale seeming like an artifact from another, cruder civilization. "Go ahead, David." The summary. David stood at parade rest. Damian Vale is, for all intents and purposes, gone. After the divorce was finalized, and the prenup was executed in our favor, he attempted to sue in 3 different states. Our legal team countersued for his bad faith filings, and he was forced to declare bankruptcy. His subsequent attempts to sell his story to tabloids were blocked by the NDAs in his original CEO contract, which we enforced. He was professionally disbarred from practicing in the financial sector due to the moral turpitude clause. He is, as of this report, a junior regional manager at a mid-level home insurance company in Dayton, Ohio. He has changed his last name to Miller. He's being sued by 2 different women in Ohio for fraud and outstanding personal debts. David slid a single, grainy photograph from the file. It showed a man, 20 pounds heavier, his hair thinning rapidly, getting into a beat-up Ford Fiesta in a grey, slushy parking lot. Rowan looked at the photo. She was not looking for Damian, the monster who had humiliated her. She was looking, one last time, for Dami, the man she had met in the acquisitions department, the man who had made her laugh, the man she had married. He wasn't there. It was just a stranger, a pathetic, broken man in a cheap suit. "And Ms. Jensen?" Rowan asked, her voice flat. Also neutralized, her attempt to launch a tell-all podcast was met by our legal team, who provided the IRS with satellite photos of her accepting cash payments from a rival developer and copies of her faked tax returns. She is currently buried in a federal audit and was last seen bartending at a dive bar in Miami-Dade. "Thank you, David. That will be all." David nodded, turned, and left the office. Rowan was alone again. She picked up the photo of Damian Miller. She had expected to feel something. Satisfaction, anger, even pity. She felt nothing. It was the profound, echoing absence of feeling. It was the feeling of a long, agonizing fever finally breaking. The war was over. The enemy wasn't just defeated, he had been erased. She picked up the file and the photo, walked over to the heavy-duty shredder by her desk, and fed them in. The machine whined, a satisfying final sound. He was literally disposed of. The intercom buzzed again. "Miss Blackwood, it's your father, on the line from the Aegean." Rowan smiled, the first genuine smile of the day, and picked up the receiver. "I thought you were supposed to be retired, Dad." "Retirement is boring," Julian's voice crackled, the sound of wind and sea spray in the background. "I'm on the Albatross, halfway to Rhodes. Just wanted to tell you I'm looking at the Q3 numbers. I have to say I'm impressed. You're better at this than I ever was." "I had a good teacher," Rowan said, looking out at her city. "You had a good spirit," Julian corrected. "I just taught you how to weaponize it. Selling the Vanguard building was a gutsy move. Gutsy. I was sentimental about it. Damian loved that gaudy thing. You saw it for what it was, a liability. That's why you're in that chair, and I'm on this boat. Are you enjoying the boat?" "Immensely. Speaking of which," Arthur called. "Your uncle. He said to tell you he's proud, but that you'd better not forget to read poetry as well as prophets. He's worried you're all Blackwood and no Kendall these days." Rowan laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Tell him I read a poem every night before I read the market reports. I haven't forgotten." "I know," Julian said, his voice soft. "That's what makes you better than me, Ellie Bean. You actually know the difference. Which is why it's all yours." Rowan paused. "What's all mine?" "All of it. The Asian funds, the European banks, the whole damn portfolio. I'm officially retiring. You're not the CEO of the North American division anymore. You're the chairwoman of Blackwood Capital. The only chairwoman. I'm tired. I'm going to learn to sail this thing properly." This was it. The final test. The final handover. The throne. Rowan didn't gasp. She didn't falter. She just watched a plane take off from JFK in the far distance, a silver glint in the sun. "I'm ready," she said. "I know you are," her father replied. "Carry on, Madam Chairwoman." The line clicked. Rowan placed the receiver back in its cradle. She stood there for a full minute, alone, the undisputed head of one of the most powerful private funds on the planet. Damian had thought power was loud. He'd thought it was a scarlet dress and a public humiliation. He'd thought it was a flashy building with his name on it. He thought it was the thunder of 100 cameras flashing, the roar of a crowd. Rowan knew the truth. She'd always known it. Real power wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was competent. It was the silence of this office. It was the authority in her father's voice as he abdicated. It was the weight of the ocean, not the crash of the waves. She buzzed her assistant. "Ben, ask Sarah to come back in, and have her bring the Kendall blueprints." A minute later, Sarah was back, unrolling a massive set of architectural plans across Rowan's conference table. It wasn't a tower, it wasn't a monument, it was a community. 5 square blocks in a neglected part of Brooklyn, redesigned from the ground up. Sustainable, green-roofed apartment buildings, half of them designated for low-income families and educators, a new public school, a park, a community center. This was the antithesis of the Titan Tower. It wasn't built on leverage and ego. It was built on profits and purpose. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, quietly. "It's a start," Rowan replied. She picked up a heavy, old-fashioned fountain pen, her mother's. She walked to the blueprints, found the signature line, and signed it. Rowan Blackwood. "Get the press team ready," she said, her voice ringing with the quiet, indisputable sound of real power. "Let's build something that lasts." What did you think of Rowan's revenge? It just goes to show that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Damian thought he was the king, but he was just a pawn in a game being played by a queen and her father, the true master. His arrogance and public betrayal led to the most public and most satisfying downfall we've seen in a long time. This story is a reminder to never underestimate anyone, and that karma, especially when backed by a multi-trillion-dollar fortune, always finds its mark. We spend a lot of time finding and crafting these incredible real-life dramas for you. If you loved Rowan's story, please show your support by hitting that like button. And if you want to make sure you never miss a story of satisfying revenge or dramatic twists, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that bell.